Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of our fortnightly IRENA Insights webinar series. My name is Karan Kocher, and I am from the IRENA Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn, Germany. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to introduce IRENA and to our webinar series. IRENA is an intergovernmental organization with currently 168 member countries and another 16 countries in the accession process. We support countries in the transition to a sustainable energy future and serve as a principal platform for international cooperation, a center of excellence, and a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. And because our work and our engagement with our members generate a lot of valuable insights, we're constantly looking for more ways to share those insights with you. And that's why we launched this webinar series, which we run every other week, usually on Tuesdays. We started in January 2020 before the pandemic proliferated many virtual events. And so far, we have organized over 40 webinars on various topics. You can check them all on our IRENA events website, and the link to that will be in our presentation slides. We also appreciate that there are many deep dive webinars which are much longer out there, but here we try to do something a bit more contrary. These webinars last approximately 30 minutes, which means we cannot clearly cover everything, but the idea is to give you enough to decide whether you want to delve deeper into the topic. And we signpost in our presentation further resources for more in-depth information if you want to do so. Next slide, please. And so today, while you enjoy your coffee, tea, or bagel, in the next 30 minutes, we're going to hear from Michael Renner. Michael is the head of socioeconomics at IRENA's Knowledge, Policy, and Finance Center. His work focuses on the socioeconomic impacts of renewable energy, including employment and just transition. Today, he will share insights from IRENA's latest annual report on jobs in renewable energy. But before I hand over the microphone to Michael, just a few brief housekeeping rules, which I'm sure you're certainly aware of from other online events. We are recording this webinar, and we will post the recording and the slides on IRENA's event websites within the next 48 hours. You are by default on mute, but if you have any questions, we encourage you to use the chat function. And without any further ado, let me welcome Michael. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Karan, for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be with you. Hello, everybody. So I will be presenting today about our work on renewable energy and employment. And maybe to start us off, I should say, why think about employment? Of course, in any economy around the world, employment is really important because this is how people get their livelihoods, how they get their incomes that they need to sustain their lives. But I think jobs are particularly critical during the energy transition, given that we know there will be all kinds of fundamental changes and perhaps disruptions to various economic structures, both in the energy sector itself, but also in sectors that relate to energy. And of course, many other sectors are very dependent on energy inputs. So jobs, I think it's quite easy to argue, represent a very tangible benefit that gives people a stake in the transformation that's coming in the energy transition, and therefore really has at least the potential to raise the political acceptance of that transition. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Good, thank you. So at IRENA, we have been studying the issue of job creation in renewable energy over the past decade or so. We actually just published in September the 9th annual edition of our report, Renewable Energy and Jobs. And so we keep generating annual estimates for different renewable energy technologies, looking at the world and looking at selected countries. And as you can see in this first slide, we now estimate that as of 2021, the number of people that held jobs in the renewable energy sector directly or indirectly was about 12.7 million people, right? So that has continued to grow year after year from about 7.3 million jobs back in 2012. If you go to the next slide, that slide then actually zeroes in on this most recent year, on 2021. And you can see quite clearly that the photovoltaic industry claims the top spot among the different technologies. with close to 4.3 million jobs, which is about more than 1/3 of the total renewable energy workforce worldwide. That is followed by biofuels, by the hydropower sector, and by wind, whereas the other technologies are not quite as important, they're not quite as dynamic as these top industries. Next slide, please. Now, a different way to look at this, of course, is not just from the global perspective, but really to say, so what happens around the world? And you will see, and it is worth noting, that a relatively small number of countries, China, Brazil, India, the United States, and the members of the European Union, really dominate the renewable energy landscape in many, many ways. Now, that's not very surprising in a sense, because they, of course, they represent a very major chunk of the world economy. And very specifically to the renewable energy landscape, they are the major installation markets. They are very significant producers and sometimes exporters of equipment, and also providers of related services. So of course, that does translate into a significant number of jobs. Now, let me focus particularly on China, which alone accounts for about 42% of the global renewable energy jobs in 2021. China is followed by the European Union and by Brazil with about 10%, a 10% share each, and then followed by the US and India with about 7% each. So clearly very significant chunks of the employment picture in those countries. But at the same time, I think it's also fair to say that while the job numbers in other countries, in other parts of the world, are not as large, are not as significant, there is more and more evidence that there is significant job creation really pretty much around the world. And let me just point out, for example, that a number of Southeast Asian countries now have become major solar PV manufacturing hubs. Mexico and Turkey, for example, have become significant regional, not global, but regional suppliers of wind turbine blades. And I think more and more countries will, as time passes and as the right kinds of policies are being put in place, will actually find that they can find a particular niche that they will be able to create a rising number of jobs in their own right. Next slide, please. So a key question, of course, is what are some of the factors that actually influence employment generation in renewable energy? And there's, as this slide indicates, as this illustration indicates, there's a number of factors. I should say this particular illustration is actually from the report that we put out in 2021, but I think it keeps worth being highlighting. So a number of factors that are worth mentioning are the cost and the competitiveness of renewables, investment trends, the size and the particular dynamics of national and regional markets, labor intensities, and I think also the whole issue of supply chain geographies are really important factors to highlight. Now, all of these are in different ways shaped and influenced by public policy making, but of course also by various corporate strategies. Let me go to the next slide then, please. So I want to highlight the issue of the geographic footprint of particularly the equipment industry for wind and solar. And as you can see in the slide, these are the two technologies that are being highlighted here. So the fact that a number of countries are really not just important installation markets, but really are very important in terms of producing the equipment that's being used in wind and solar, and are significant exporters, that really comes through in this particular set of illustrations on this slide. In solar photovoltaics, close to half of the world's module production in 2021 was exported. The bulk of that, of course, as you might know, took place in China, which is the dominant installer and exporter. You have a number of major installation countries, Germany, Brazil, India, the United States, Japan, that really are, on the other hand, very important net importers of modules. If you look on the in the wind power industry, however, it's a very different picture. There, Europe accounts for about 40% of the world's turbine manufacturing, and for more than 3/4 of the global equipment exports. There is some shifting of the production of equipment. Some of the components is moving to other countries now. And this is in response to growing markets elsewhere, in response to local content requirements, and also, of course, to corporate strategies to keep shifting around the manufacturing footprint and to really seek out more and more cheap or low-cost labor. As far as China is concerned, I think it's important to say that China itself has a very significant domestic market. It's actually the largest market in wind now. But the Chinese companies are really at this point still very much focused on their own domestic, on their own home market. But that is beginning to change. We now see actually exports from China also rising, and I would imagine that coming years will bring a fairly dramatic change of the landscape in that industry. So let me just make a somewhat large observation here. We, I think, can quite clearly see a handful of dominant manufacturing hubs in renewable energy, but we also see that the still lingering impact of the COVID-19 crisis have put a spotlight on the viability of very far-flung supply chains. And so we see that in addition to various trade disputes, to geopolitical rivalries, and all of this is really reinforcing the interest now in a greater localization of supply chains. There is some resort to trade protectionist measures, but it's also, and I think this is in a sense far more interesting, there is growing interest in a more sophisticated industrial policy and in pursuing local content strategies to build and expand domestic supply chains and capture more of the value created and the jobs being created locally. With that, let's move to the next slide, please. So this shows the main segments of the renewable energy supply chain. And typically what we are able to cover in our reports on employment is the segment that starts really from the manufacturing of the equipment onto the construction and installation and onto operations and maintenance. Those are sort of the major elements where we have fairly good information about employment generation in the sector. And this is, as you can see on the bottom of the slide, this is added to that are a range of services and support functions. But what we need to really pay more and more attention to now as we move forward is the segments that lie even further upstream, so the raw materials inputs into the industry, and also the ones that are further downstream. In other words, after the equipment reaches the end of its useful life, what actually happens to the equipment and to the materials that are bound up in that equipment. So we need to look very closely, I think, more and more closely at environmental and labor standards in the mining of raw materials that are critical to renewable energy. So we're talking about copper, cobalt, lithium, nickel, rare earths, and many, many other materials. We do know that this is nothing new. We do know that large-scale mining operations have a very significant environmental footprint. And there are, of course, very important issues related to the occupational health and safety of the workers in that industry. So that's on the large-scale mining side, right? We also have a fairly large number of people that are engaged in small-scale mining. But these are typically the world's most marginalized and vulnerable workers, and they're often very much exposed to hazardous and exploitative working conditions. So there's a real issue that needs far more scrutiny and far more attention. Now, on the other end of the supply chain, there is the need to prioritize recycling, repair and remanufacturing of the various materials and pieces of equipment that are bound up in the solar panels and in wind turbines, once all of this equipment reaches the end of its useful life, right? So if there is more recycling, more reuse, the benefits include there are limits to the volume of waste that is coming due. We can reduce the extraction of virgin materials, and in principle, we can actually create more jobs along the way than if we actually just do landfilling and incineration of these materials. But again, the quality of the jobs really must be looked at very closely. We know that a lot of the renewable energy equipment contains toxic substances. And I think it goes without saying that workers need to be protected from occupational safety and health hazards through laws and regulations in order to make sure that the working conditions are being improved. And we know, if you look at the whole issue, for example, with e-waste, with electronic waste, we know there are many, many issues that need to be looked at very, very closely by policymakers and by others. With that in mind, let me move to my last slide. And so what I'd like to end with in this presentation is to say that in addition to the policymaking that revolves closely around the issue of, how do we enable installations of renewables? How do we make that process much easier? We need to really look at a set of structural and just transition policies as well. So we need to look at the issue of industrial policies to form more viable supply chains, to leverage and enhance local capabilities. We need to get very serious about education and training strategies to create a skilled workforce. We need to engage in active labor market measures to provide adequate employment services, to facilitate perhaps where labor mobility is an issue, to facilitate that process. And we need to really look very, very seriously at policies to promote a more circular economy in the renewable energy sector. So let me finish with one particular thought. I think not only do we need to make sure that we engage in these different kinds of policy areas, that we actually look at them as a holistic whole rather than issue by issue, but we really need to make sure that we actually allow the communities and workers that are really on the front lines, as it were, that they have a very clear and strong voice in the design and the shaping of the transition period that's ahead of us. And with that, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. You certainly covered a lot in your presentation, and it is very encouraging to see that the jobs in renewable energy are growing. I think that's the first sign that things are moving in the right direction. I would like to move on to the next section, which is the Q&A, and we can take certain questions from the audience. So if you have certain questions, you still have time to put that in the chat box. Meanwhile, we can focus on the questions that we have already received. I think the first question, I think a bunch of questions we've received is talks about the projection of jobs till 2030. So if you could perhaps comment on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So yeah, part of our work stream on the socioeconomic analysis of renewable energy and of the energy transition is to say, what would actually happen if we follow a energy transition pathway that is in keeping with the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. So keeping to the goal of not allowing warming to go higher than the 1.5 degrees Celsius. So IRENA has a scenario with that in mind. And we are looking at the socioeconomic implications of that scenario, if that came to pass, if we can actually stick to that particular pathway. And we find that with a particularly very strong upfront set of investments into renewable energy and other energy transition technologies, such as energy efficiency, we can basically create far more jobs than will likely be lost in the fossil fuel sector. That's, I think, really a key point to observe. Now, having said that, I think there are some real challenges along the way, right? Because the fact that in terms of numbers alone that we can create more jobs than we lose, does of course not mean that everybody who loses a job will actually automatically gain one, right? There are differences in terms of how this plays out along the time scale, right? Some of the jobs might be lost much more quickly than the new jobs that are being created. Right. There are spatial issues, right? The jobs don't necessarily get created in the same place, right? So the communities that are highly fossil fuel dependent may not really benefit either at all, or may not benefit sufficiently from the growth of renewable energy unless we take certain policy steps, right? I mean, that's really the key point to emphasize. We also need to look very closely at how much can we match the needed skills with what workers can already bring to the job, right? Do we need to basically engage in efforts to match those skills, those skill profiles? Right. How do we enable workers to actually pick up on skills that they may need that they do not have yet? Right. There is a whole range of issues that I think can be addressed very proactively, and I think with very good benefit. Okay.
I think that's a good forecast going forward. We have received a couple more questions. I'll take the one that sort of follows the discussion from before. There's one question on the steps that we need to take to scale up renewable energy jobs in Africa.
Right. I mean, I think that's an excellent question, because I think a lot of people are pointing out, and IRENA as well is pointing out, that in principle, Africa has enormous potential when it comes to renewable energy, right? I mean, particularly with regard to solar photovoltaics. I think the problem that we're seeing now is how do we translate that potential into reality? And I think over the past decade or so, the share of investments in Africa relative to the global investments in renewable energy has been on the level of about 2%, right? So that is, of course, much too small a share compared to the potential of Africa. I think also compared to the need to step up with regard to energy access, to move from polluting sources to much cleaner sources. So I think we need to really get much more serious in terms of mobilizing finance. Again, building a capable workforce, making sure that we apply the full range of policy measures not just in countries like China, which has been very successful, or countries in Europe that have also been leading a pioneering or fulfilling a pioneering role, but really including in African countries as well.
Okay, that's okay. We have received another question on skills development. You mentioned a little, you elaborated a little on the need to retrain workforce. The audience wants to know what are your thoughts on the skill development, particularly the nature of skills needed and what kind of jobs can they get? Are they looking for more low, medium, or high skills? What kind of jobs would the sector generate?
So the work that we have done and the work that others as well have done, I think, indicates quite strongly that the development of renewable energy really can be supporting a broad range, or really needs a broad range of skills, right? From very high skilled, very formalized kinds of skills to the more informal ones.
Right.
I think so. I mean, you have people who basically have a university career, who have very formal training, but you of course have a very large number of people that you need in terms of construction and installation, in terms of operations and maintenance. So there's a broad range of skills that I think are really applicable to renewable energy. I think that the key aspect, I would say, is that we need to really, as much as possible, try to anticipate what will the needs be, what kinds of skills are most in need. How do we actually make sure that the skills need is matched by the skills that people can actually bring to bear, the kinds of education strategies that young people can pursue, right? I think we need to really do far more in the way of coordinating, in terms of forecasting, anticipating what will likely happen.
Right. Okay. And okay, I think this is it. And I would like, Michael, I would like to thank you for your time and sharing with us your knowledge and your insights on the IRENA's latest work. And I would like to thank the audience for joining us today. And we hope that you learned something new. Next slide, please. In 2 weeks, we have another webinar on gender. The registrations will open soon, and we look forward to seeing you there again. And this is all from us today. I wish you a great rest of the day. Goodbye, and see you soon.